Uh, let's open our Bibles on the First Corinthians, the letter to Corinthians, first letter to Corinthians. And before we read, I want to tell you an interesting story from the life of my friend who does flips. And that's, you know, he does it for a living. And once he bought a house, and when he bought that house for a flip, he didn't realize that maybe he didn't pay too much attention, or, you know, when those flips are bought, sometimes people, those who buy, they don't have much time to do the inspections and all the necessary steps for the purchase process. And he basically didn't notice that the foundation of the building had a little crack. And over the time, you know, during the project of, you know, remodeling and rebuilding the house, he realized that this crack was actually, that small crack appeared to be a huge problem. And usually, you know, people who buy those flips, they kind of invest a little bit of money in the flip, maybe not a little bit, but the goal is to make some money on on this project. So, and unfortunately, because of that crack, it appeared that a part of the building actually was sinking, and he had to jack up part of the building. He had to do and pour concrete, do a lot of additional actions or additional steps in the construction process, which he didn't plan to do at all. And of course, that was not part of the, you know, project estimate. As a result, not only didn't he make any money, but he also lost a part of his investment because of that. Why am I telling about this? Because the foundation is important, and we're going to talk about this today. And we will read first the letter to Corinthians, first letter to Corinthians, chapter 3. We will read a little bit bigger passage, and then we'll focus on a little bit shorter part of this passage. So chapter 3, verse 6, Apostle Paul says, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it, for no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you?" That's a really interesting passage, and the sermon that I'm going to talk today, I called it "The God of Accountability." You may first think, what does accountability have to do with the passage that we read, that we just read here? And I want to tell you that we see here that Apostle Paul says a lot about how to build a building. And basically, he takes a building as an example, or he takes the construction process as an example of how we build our lives. And if you followed the line of thoughts that Apostle Paul has here, he clearly identifies that we will be held accountable. Like the builder who built this building, the test will come, and it will test how the building was constructed, what materials were used, what foundation was used, and that will check, that test will check or will see what the results or what the outcome of the building was. So in this passage we can ask or we can see that God will keep us accountable for how we built our lives. God will keep us accountable for the way how we built our temple. Because we just read, he says, don't you know that you're God's temple? We are God's building. Our bodies are his building. Our life is his building. And it's important that everything we do, regardless whether we think about this or we do not think about this, but everything we do, this is a part of this construction process that we carry out through the entire life. So when we look at this, we may think, how will God evaluate our life, or how will he keep us accountable for the work that we've done in our life? And we can see here that God will evaluate our service according to 3 simple tests. So there are 3 simple tests, and we will talk a little bit today. We will try to keep our line of thought short as much as I can, but I want to focus our attention on 3 tests that we can see in this passage. First test is what foundation was used for the building. It is important to lay the right foundation, and you can see, if you remember the example I told you at the beginning about my friend, the foundation was the problem of that building. The foundation was the foundation, it takes a small part of the building. In most cases, the foundation is invisible because it's under the ground. But it is a very important part of the building. If you remember that illustration that Jesus Christ told once to his disciples, he told him about 2 men who built their homes, and one of them built it on the rock, and another one built it on the sand. And you remember what happened to those homes, to those houses. One was destroyed, that was built on the sand, and the other one survived because it had a strong foundation. It is important for us to remember that the true foundation is only Jesus Christ. This is what we see in this passage, and you probably will see that on the screen as well, that true foundation, the right foundation, it is Jesus Christ only. And we can read this in this chapter or in this passage. It is impossible to choose another foundation for the arrangement of your life. It is impossible to choose a different foundation if you want to lead the right life, if you want to live the life that will bring the results, that would lead you to eternity, that will lead you to salvation. If you build it on something else, it will not survive, because there is only one correct foundation. It is impossible to choose a different foundation if you want to live a meaningful life. The value of the foundation cannot be underestimated. If in your life of a person, if you think that you can choose a different foundation, you will fail. We can see that building on Christ and based on this example, we can see that how important it is to choose the right foundation. Apostle Paul says, I laid this foundation, and then Apollos built on it, and then this building, this whole building that you're building, it grew, and it grew up into the good building. It's interesting that people try to prove the opposite, but they will always fail. If you look at our world, Google says that it is about 28,000 religions and different religions and beliefs in the world. People tend to believe in whatever they want. But the whole purpose of those beliefs is that they do not want to be accountable for the life that they live. And it is easier to believe in superstitions. It is easier to believe in some God who you can just hide from if you go under into a building, inside of a building, and that God will not see you. There are beliefs like that. Some people believe in those gods. Or there are people who believe that you can do whatever you want and then you die, and in the next life there is reincarnation, and in the next life, depending on how you lived your life, you will have the results, and you will have a chance to change whatever you did in the previous life. So you need to be careful, or you need to think about the next life, the future life, but that's life on the earth. And sometimes it is much more easier to believe in those religions, but not to believe in real God who created us. And like I said, the main reasons for those actions is because people don't want to be held accountable. They don't want to be responsible for their actions. But the truth is that it is only Jesus Christ who can give us salvation, and He can give the peace to a human soul. It is only God who can do this to our souls. The main reason there are 28,000 religions in the world is because none of them can give the peace to a human soul other than Jesus Christ. Because He is the only foundation that you can take to build your life. A true Christian always builds his life on Jesus Christ. It is the center, it is the basis of a Christian's life, because it is the only choice that you can choose for your life if you want to live a meaningful life. Friend, what is your foundation? I want to ask you this question. What is your foundation? What are you building on? What is the basis for your decisions? Are you making your decisions based on the Bible and on God's principles, or you are making those decisions based on something else? Who are you looking up to when you don't know what to do, or when you need some guidance in decision making, in whatever decision making processes you do? Who is Christ for you? Is He the center of your life, or He's just someone who you go to in case you have a problem, you need some assistance? It is, if you don't know, it is time to stop and think today and make a decision today if you have not decided yet, or if you understand that you are moving in the wrong direction. We also can see that Apostle Paul said that the true foundation is given only by the grace of God. You cannot earn this right for the true foundation. You cannot do anything to earn it, or to be worth of this right foundation, because it is given by the grace of God. And this is what we read here. By the way, what is grace? What is grace? Grace is an undeserved gift, something that you didn't deserve, something that was just given to you. Our children, for example, they get a lot of grace from their parents because they didn't deserve pretty much nothing that they have. That is grace that's given to them. That's something that their parents give them, but they didn't do anything good or wrong to earn the shelter, for example, above their heads, right? They didn't do anything to earn the food that we're giving our children every day. That's what is called grace. But God has been giving us grace not just every day. God's grace is in the very important thing, in this salvation that He has given to us, that He gives us this gift of salvation. And this is the foundation that you can build your life upon, meaning that the salvation is when Jesus Christ comes into your life. And you cannot do anything to earn it. You cannot force God to come into your life. You cannot do any good deeds to earn the right for salvation or the right for Jesus Christ to, He is not obligated to come into our life. It is very important to understand that this is God's grace. And Apostle Paul, by the way, was a very educated man for his time. And at the same time, he says in his letters, for this grace from God to me. There are several places where this expression is mentioned in his letters. He realizes that it's not because he is so smart, it's not because he is clever or educated. This is because he received the grace from God. And it is important for us to understand that the right foundation we can get only by the grace of God. You can ask God to come into your life and ask God for His grace, and He will give this grace to you, because that's the reason why Jesus Christ came to the earth. And God will keep us accountable for the way how we build our lives. Then, so the first test is that what foundation was used for the construction process or for the building that we build here on the earth. The second test that God will use is what materials were used for the building. What materials we selected for the building. And we can see here two interesting things. The first is that materials vary from expensive to cheap. What we read just here is that he mentioned several materials, and they vary. And if you let me, I can read an excerpt from Matthew Henry, a very good theologian and Bible, who wrote Bible commentary. And he said, some build gold, silver, precious stones on this foundation. They accept and spread the pure truth of the gospel, hold to the truth that is in Jesus, and preach nothing else but it. They build well on a good foundation. Others build on this foundation of wood, hay, straw. That is, although they adhere to this foundation, in many ways they evade the Spirit of Christ, replacing His teachings and commandments with their own fantasies and inventions. That's an interesting way how he put it, and I believe that's exactly what's written here, because Apostle Paul says that it starts with gold, then silver, and so on, and it goes to hay and straw. It's interesting that that we can ask ourselves, what are materials we use in our life? What are those materials that we use in our life? And those are our actions or our deeds, so to speak, the components of our life. Those are those materials that are mentioned here. It seems to me that this gradation suggests that we should first do the most important things in our life, and then we can do secondary things. What would be the most important things or actions that we should do in our life? We should spread the gospel. We should do something that has the eternal meaning, not just temporary here on the earth. Of course, we should care about earthly things as well, but it shouldn't be the primary goal. It shouldn't take the primary time in our life, because we should understand what is eternal and what is temporary. Like those materials, like gold, silver, diamonds, or precious stones, as we just read here, they are pretty much eternal, right? They do not rust. They do not lose their value, because those are very expensive materials, and there are other materials which are just temporary. It is when you, friends, I want to say that a Christian constantly struggles with temptation to take a cheap material instead of an expensive one, because it looks the same, but it is much more cheaper. It is much more easier to get it. Also, friends, what I think is that in our life, we sometimes, or very often, we start with expensive materials and we finish with the cheap materials. when we start a new project, or when we start a new ministry, or we just, start a new chapter in our life, so to speak. For example, someone gets married. We think, oh, I will do this. I will pray every day. I will read Bible every day. And this is, by the way, about New Year resolutions. The New Year is coming up. I will read Bible every day. I will pray for 15 minutes every day. I will go to church every day. So there are so good intentions. We want to invest in those expensive materials. And then little by little we switch to those cheap materials. And we don't use those expensive materials anymore. Instead of investing in eternal things, we invest in temporary things. And this is very frustrating, and I believe it's frustrating for God because He will keep us accountable. Another thing that we can see here is that materials are divided into flammable and non-flammable, or we can say also it is combustible and non-combustible materials. Some of those materials that we just read, they sometimes can, some of them can take the fire and they will go through the fire without any loss, without any damage to those materials, and others will not survive the fire test. The church that I'm coming from, I came to the States when I was 33 years old, and before that I lived in Ukraine, and for 15 years we built a new building for the church. It was a big church, big building, and of course it took a long time to build it. So we invested a lot of time, a lot of, tried to gather donations everywhere we could. We donated as much as we could give to God for the construction of this of the building of the church. And once in a while the fire marshal would come out and he would check the construction process, and they would check the materials that were used for constructions. And there was a time when the fire marshal shut down the construction process completely because he told that some materials that were used in the process were not designed for that kind of the building, and they were flammable, meaning that in case of a fire they would burn very easily, and that would help to burn down the entire building. And the leadership of the church was so upset about that decision, frustrated, because that meant that we had to redo a part of construction, and that was loss of money, loss of time, loss of resources. But that was the right thing to do, because if the building would catch fire, it would just burn down completely. And the same happens in our life if we do not invest in fire-resistant materials. If we use those cheap materials like straw, like hay, like wood instead of precious stones, those materials will just burn down when the fire will test our building. And by the way, the third test is coming. We already talked about 2 tests, and the third test is coming, which means that God will test what is the outcome of our life. What is the result of our life? What we have done in our life. And we can read once again just to remember what Apostle Paul said. Each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through the fire. Friends, what do we see here? First, we see that the test must take place in a fire. That's interesting. And sometimes this is frustrating for us to understand, but those tests take place in the fire. When I studied at the university, I learned how lifting equipment tests are carried out. For example, when a factory starts production of, let's say, a crane, right? They designed a new crane, and it has to go through the state testing to make sure that that crane can survive, those loads and to be able to operate correctly according to the codes. So the crane, during the test, the crane would lift a load that significantly exceed the design capacity, the design load, and it has to load. I don't remember the numbers, but let's say it has to lift the double load that it's actually designed for. But the interesting part is that it's not only has to lift that load, it has to stay in that condition for a certain time. For example, 72 hours. It has to lift that load and stay in that condition, because there were cases when the equipment would not be able to hold that load, and over some time the materials will start, it's called material fatigue, when basically materials would crack over time, and that equipment will break down. Friends, sometimes in our life, our Lord not only forces us to lift a load that we think that we will not be able to carry, but He also makes us hold that load for an extensive period of time. And we start asking questions. We would cry to God and to the Lord and say, "Why, Lord? Why me? What for is it in my life?" And we can ask so many questions, but we should remember that every Christian will go through the fire in their life. Of course, no one wants to go through the fire. Everyone wants to live an easy life and, get to the salvation, get to eternity, get to the heavenly kingdom, smoothly, without any issues, without any problems. But God never promised us an easy life. He never told us that just come to me, repent, and I will make your life easier. No, He said, I will help you. I will be with you. I will go with you. But He never promised us an easy life. And this is a fiery test. This is the test by fire, when trials and tribulations and even persecutions would come into our life. And that's the test by fire. And of course, I'm talking about saved people already. I'm not talking about just all the people in the world. I'm talking about those who are already saved, because God will test those who follow Him. And the next thing we can see here is that the test will lead either to a reward or a punishment. Again, we're talking about saved people. We're talking here that God will give rewards to His followers when the time will come, and he says about this in this chapter. And friends, for that reason, it is important to watch our life very carefully. It is important to always see if we have the right foundation. Or maybe we started building on the right foundation and then over time it cracked. Maybe our building started sinking, and maybe without even realizing, little by little we drifted away from God. We drifted away from His teaching because we started investing into wrong materials. We started using wrong materials in the construction process. For that reason, it is important to understand that God will test us, and depending on how we go through the test, we either will get a reward or will get a punishment. It is important for us to ask 3 questions today, friends. I want all of us now to ask just 3 simple questions. The first question is, what kind of foundation is laid for our building? Is Jesus Christ my foundation or not? Have I built my life on Jesus Christ, or I need to review this decision? Is my life Christ-centered or not? The second question that we should ask ourselves is, what materials we use to construct, to build our building, to build our life? And let's take the example from Apostle Paul, who says that he fights not only to beat the air, like he said, but he does not run just to be counted, but he runs to get a reward. Friends, that's important for us to understand, that we want to get the reward from our Savior when the time will come for that. And the third question which we can ask ourselves, what result will I get, or what outcome will I get from the life that I've built or which I constructed? You know, I've seen quite a few pretty elderly people coming to God at the end of their life. And when they prayed, they said, Lord, I wish I could live my life once again. I wish I could start my life over and I wouldn't make those mistakes which I made in my life, because they realized that they lived a wrong life, that they lived the life in vain. And when they already spent all their young years, when they spent everything for, just for their own pleasures, just for their own needs, without actually living a meaningful life, then they realized that it was all for nothing. Friends, it's important for us to build on the right foundation, to use the right materials in our Christian life, and in that case, we will get the right result. Amen?